Welcome to the Clean Library Podcast, where content meets conscience. We believe there are millions of you readers out there desperately searching for a better way to find clean content. Each episode, we will introduce you to a new author of clean books, giving you, your family, and your friends clean options.
Hello, my name is Marcus Williams. Welcome to the Clean Library Podcast. Today we have special guest Garrett. At the age of 17, Garrett escaped from a nomadic Scientology splinter cult. Since then, he's worked as a teacher, a firefighter, a barbecue restaurant manager, a cowboy theater actor, a DJ, a bellman, a concierge, a rock crusher, and as a rubber vulcanizing engineer, among many others. He's traveled all over the world, speaks 4 languages, and teaches groups large and small about overcoming trauma, the creative process, and the power of belief. He also writes under the pen name Jerry Ironspear. Welcome, Jared. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
I'm glad to be here, Marcus.
Yeah. So this is the point where I usually read the Two Truths and a Lie, but today you're going to
because
tell them
Jared
to me.
Is ill-prepared sometimes.
No problem. So if you want to go ahead and give us your 2 truths and a lie, I'm going to make some notes so that I can think about them as we go. And then,
unfortunately, some of my two truths and a lie are revealed whether or not they're lies or truths through the bio. So that's fun. But I will say a couple of other things here. So,
okay.
You don't want me to tell you which are truths, or do you want me to tell you which are lies? Sorry. Okay, good.
Nope, don't tell me right now. At the end of the episode, I'll guess.
I won a primetime game show in the last 5 years. I worked for one of the biggest companies in the world for 3 years. And one time, I drove from Seattle, Washington to Orem, Utah in 9 hours.
Wow. Okay. So I've got you won a primetime game show in the last 5 years. 2, you worked for the biggest company on the planet for 3 years. And 4, you drove from Seattle to Orem in 9 hours.
That's
right. Okay. All right. We'll see if we can figure those out as we go. All right. So interesting start to life. And you've done a lot of things and you've been a lot of places. How did you end up getting into writing?
I mean, that's the big question for writers, right? I think my answer is very similar to almost any writer out there. I grew up loving books. But I can also honestly say that books saved my life. They definitely saved my sanity from the terrible childhood I was experiencing in the cult, which you read in the bio. That was a nomadic thing that moved all over the country for a while. Started in England. It was neglectful, and I never felt like I could trust anybody because I couldn't. So the books were my escape. For starters, I could just go someplace out of sight and read for literally days at a time, and not have to deal with anybody. But then something funny happened. I also found that the books started to show me not only how I could build a world, build a life and a storyline for my own life that I would prefer, but they also showed me that I had the power to do that. I mean, I've never really tried to formally count how many books I read, but I did once read almost every single book in the Oaklawn branch of the Dallas Public Library between the ages of 11 and 16. I'm including espionage, romance, fantasy, science fiction, comic books, some reference books even too. I learned a lot about the JFK assassination. So that, I think it just became natural for me to, because stories about heroes, people who get everything beat out of them and beaten down. Since I read those stories, I wanted to tell those stories, and it's never. I tried once to quit writing. It went very, very poorly for my mental health. So I also write for my mental health, but I got into writing because I wanted to tell stories that people could stand up and cheer about.
That's awesome. So, do is it kind of a constant theme throughout your books that overcoming big odds, hero
Yeah,
journey type
absolutely.
theme?
Through my science fiction, fantasy, through my contemporary fiction, there is an obvious, clear theme of a young person who must stick it to the man. I mean, this is chip on the shoulder,
Mhm.
Jared, his whole life. So, I mean, there's a whole series of books that are very autobiographical, but absolutely overcome the bad authority that's clearly bad. There's no ambiguity about the evil of that needs to be taken down. And I mean, my heroes also get really beaten up in physically, emotionally, mentally. Um, I have them deal with mental health issues, which I think is appropriate for today's world. But they never give up,
Hmm.
and they will keep going, and they always win, always. Yeah.
Yeah. So, have you gotten feedback from readers regarding the hard topics that you kind of address in your
Um,
books?
that's an interesting question. Sort of indirectly, I guess, through reviews. I mean,
Yeah.
I wrote a memoir and I had several people read that and give me a large amount of feedback, which told me it wasn't very good. So I had to write it again. So that was good. But for those novels, yeah, there's reviews that people talk about how like there's this one review that came out of nowhere many years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, of my first book, Beyond the Cabin, which is solid 90% autobiographical, true, about a young
Yeah.
man who's been born into a cult and is trying to get out. He doesn't know anybody he can trust, so he's fighting to get out, fighting to find his own footing. Um, I had a review come in that said, "This is a beautiful, bittersweet thing. Handles very challenging subjects and shows very difficult scenes, but still is uplifting." And that's like perfect for me. I love that. A friend who's also a writer, Josie Kilpack, she writes cozy mysteries among many other things and Regency romance. She said, "You can't forget this book. You put it down, but you'll never forget it." Which is that's all I want. I just
Yeah.
want people to love it and be able to change their lives, maybe a little out of it. I mean, the character really goes through the worst. So I hope that the hope that he finds and the strength that he finds can be an inspiration to people too. So,
That's awesome. And it's got to be especially rewarding when you can have a purpose behind why you're writing it and the reader gets
yeah,
that.
very
And
rewarding. And in that's I think that's one of the things actually that led to me expanding on that first book, Beyond the Cabin, and turning it into ultimately a 4 book series that spans almost 5 years of story time. It's the idea that well, my story didn't end when I ended it in the book. There was still a lot more for me to figure
yeah.
out. What if I told the rest of the story of fish out of water that I experienced, and then realizing later in life that I had substantial things that I needed to work on for myself? How can I depict that in an entertaining, fictional way, but still true to life, and also with romance? And That was a great challenge because I want to I want to show people real stuff, but also very happy stuff, ultimately.
Yeah. And it's, I think the best lessons are learned when the person doesn't know they're being taught a
Yeah, I
lesson,
agree. Um,
you know?
especially when reading. I know that my best lessons that I've learned in life, I wasn't wanting to learn a lesson at the time. So yeah,
Right. Right. Either it's an experience you don't want to go
yeah,
through and you're learning from it, or you gain something from a book that you're just so engaged in the story that you don't realize that that story is teaching you something until maybe that situation comes up
yeah,
in your life, or you actually stop to think about it at some point and go, oh, well, that was actually someone was teaching me when I didn't even know I was
yeah.
being
There's a
taught.
lot of truth there. I have a particular series of books that I just loved. It's called the Icewind Dale trilogy. It's in the Forgotten Realms world of that Dungeons and Dragons TSR used to run.
Uh-huh.
A guy named Robert A. Salvatore wrote these books. One of my favorite writers. I look back at those books a lot because they are just rock'em sock'em, sword and sorcery, really cool heroes adventures. But I think about the dwarf character and how being a dad was important to him and how he showed that. And I think about the barbarian character, Wolfgar, and how he gave everything for the woman he loved. And the Drow, the dark elf guy, who had deep principles and would live by those principles come what may. And it's 30 years after, it's 35 years after I read those books. And I still remember all that because, I didn't even think about it back then, right? Like you were saying, it's at the time. But today I look back and say, yeah, that was formative for me. So was Bridge to Terabithia, but in a very hurtful way.
Very different, yes. I think, that Bridge to Terabithia is a book that I think everybody, you have to experience it in some heavy way, but and it's a little bit different for everyone based on their life and what they've been going through and everything. Yeah,
that's an example of a great movie, by the way. The movie based on that book is quite lovely, by the way. Just a little plug there for Kathy.
Yeah. It is, which is nice because that's one of those where I really wanted it to be a good movie because like the book is so good. I really wanted it to be a good movie. So at some point you're dealing with a lot of hard topics and difficult experiences. So at some point you made the decision to keep them clean at some level. How did you make that decision, or what went into that?
Not to get too grim and dark or reveal too much about myself, but when I was heavy reader, since I don't remember not knowing how to read, and I don't remember not reading voraciously. Right. When I was 12, we had one of our cult kid jaunts in Dallas down to the big public library downtown, and I found a shelf of Stephen King books, and looked at found the biggest one because I had to get big books a lot of the time, or a lot of smaller books. Otherwise I'd be done with my books before we went back to the library. So I got the biggest book I could find, which was It. Yeah. And at 12, I read that book. And it was very engaging and really terrifying for me. But it was also, not clean. There's some scenes in it that I wish that I had not put in my head. So I don't like the effect that had on me, and the way it has stuck in my head is as long as it has. I think I'm being blessed with the gift of forgetfulness as I get older, which is great. But I don't want to be I don't want to put images that people wish weren't in their heads. I want to be somebody who puts something that will always be of value and of something that they can call back on and say, yeah, that's good stuff. I love this image of my main character, throwing himself out of an alcove with two blasters going, sliding across an exploding mezzanine, and then dropping to the ground while he blows all the bad guys out of the sky. That's the kind of image I want to put in somebody's head, not the terribly kind of grotesque stuff that I saw in that book and lots of other things. I read a lot. I was unfiltered in what I read. And a lot of that stuff did stick with me for a while. So I made the choice in 2009 that I wasn't going to write from all the anger that I felt at the way I grew up. I was going to write from all the love that I felt from God, actually, and from my wife, and from what I wanted to do in the world. And then I decided a year or two later that I wasn't actually going to even use anything. I was never going to have any kind of sexual thing. I was also never going to be on the page, limbs flying. And I was never going to really use swear words either. It was just, I was going to write, and it was going to be a challenge, and it was going to be, I was just going to be as clean as I could be while still being true to the story. So there's some off-screen, things that the reader can assume when somebody needs to swear because they're a bad person or they're just having a rough time. I just say they swore. Or in my dystopian, my 2-book dystopian series, I just made up the swear words for that one, which was fun. I have an Ancient American one too, and there's some really fun specific lore there. So their kind of swears or curses are based on their mythologies, and so those aren't swear words in our world. But
right,
yeah, it was I just felt like I wanted to put more of the good out there than more of the stuff that would drag people down. about 20, 12 years ago.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, that's a much more, well, I, like a very conscious decision making process. And I love the way that you outline that. And I think we forget a lot that whatever we put in our minds is there forever.
Yes.
And so those choices matter. And the fact that you had that experience as a kid and then made that conscious choice, I find that
I appreciate it.
It's really cool.
I've actually, the intentionality of it all has been important to me. So I was a teacher and then an instructional designer for 23 or 4 years. And part of that was learning learner psychology, which led me, and I already had a bit of a fascination with the brain, but that led me to a fascination with just psychology and the brain. So I've read a lot of books about psychology, and what you said, what goes into our brain stays there. That's just simply a fact. It's just there. We are responsible for what we put into other people's brains and also what we let into our brain. And we can be much more proactive and intentional about what inputs we let in our brain and how we process those inputs. That's a pet topic for me that I just absolutely adore. So I will stop there though.
No, I think it's a very interesting topic. And it's always been relevant. I think it's even more relevant today just because you've got kids who have access to so much more. They don't have to wait for their parents to take them to the library to find books. They have access to all the information. And at least for me, one of the things that we tried to teach our kids was, instead of saying, like, locking them in a cage and saying you can't do this, this, and this, teaching them, acknowledging that they're going to run into stuff in life. They're going to see stuff that they may not want to. What to do when they run into it, how to handle that, how to deal with it, how to process the decision making rather than trying to keep them away from it, because it's just inevitable.
I think that's great. That playing the long game, enabling with tools and a toolbox, even, or several toolboxes. I think that's the way to go. We've had some hits and misses. We have 7 kids. One's adopted. We brought her in when she was 13, and she's been a good handful, a challenging handful. But you can't stop the inputs. You can't stop all that stuff that they have access to. And what's fun is that is when they learn something on the internet, it definitely contradicts and supersedes anything mom or dad has said. No, that one's right. The internet was right. It's this parallel, peer learning that's more valid than the top-down learning, which is like, no, literally twice your age, kid. Helped bring you into the world.
It's interesting, but very frustrating at the same time.
Interesting in a clinical way.
I've been through that. Yeah, right. I've actually been through that experience. I can help you and teach you, and every kid's different. Like, some kids can learn from just me teaching or sharing experiences, and other kids have to learn from experience themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's no getting around it. We have to learn through personal experience. That's what we're here for. Yeah, learn through personal experience. Period.
Exactly.
So I mean, I like the way you were saying that about helping them say kind of process their decision making and how they would do that. I think that's important. Good point.
Yeah. So how does your idea creative process work from your inkling to when you actually get it down on a page?
It's interesting because it's actually becoming more standard now that I've been doing this for a while. But for a while it was just, that's an interesting idea. Cool. And if it stuck with me for a couple of weeks or a month or two, I would start writing it down, and I'd make some notes on it, and maybe not outlining necessarily, but write kind of what I think characters in the world would be. And if it stuck around long enough to get written down, that was an idea I was going to write. If it didn't stick with me, then it was a forgettable idea. These days, I don't take any chances. If I have an idea, I just write it down. It goes on my document. I have a file on my computer. I have stuff in Google Docs. I write it down because I do not want to. I'm getting old, or I'm going to say old, or uh, it's hard to lose a great idea. So, but it still has to be, hey, that's an interesting idea. Maybe it's a word of dialogue or a sentence of dialogue, or maybe it's just some situation. But I write it down, and then from writing it down to writing a book, I have very rarely had an idea for a book, started writing the idea for it, and then written the whole thing within a month or two.
Mhm.
I've done that once now. I'm in the middle of doing it for the second time intentionally. But for my science fiction, my fantasy, my other contemporary fiction, it's all, I had to chew on it for a while. And chewing on it that's an important part of writing, the pre-writing of thinking about it and letting it sit in your head. I have a whole series that I've been
Yeah.
working on in my head for 10 years. And I want to write it because it's right there. But there's so many other things I have to write. So I keep writing down, and any idea that comes about it, I write it down. But I haven't been able to develop it at all. So, but I had that again I wrote a novel 7 years ago after it was in my head for 3 or 4 years with no notes at all. And that was quite an interesting experience to start kind of compiling what was in my head on the paper. And boy, that was rough the first time through. It was pretty ugly, but it's good.
I think I've done. There's been one time where an idea came to me, and I within a month wrote that book, and it was on a road trip, and it was just the driving through New Mexico and looking at the landscape is like the story started coming to me while I'm driving, and then I just had to write it. But usually I'm kind of the same way, where I just have that idea in my head that I just kind of work on, and I'm not an outliner myself, so it's usually just something I just kind of chew on for a while until it formulates. And sometimes it's when I'm out working in the garden,
Right.
sometimes it's in the shower.
Actually, that reminds me, my book. So I have this 2-book dystopian post-apocalyptic sort of book series called Beat and Push. Beat came to me when I was running. I watched Rocky Balboa when it came out in 2006. Rocky's very important to me. It changed my life. I started running. So I ran all the time, and I was running in the winter, and my chest was like trying to claw me to death or something. And I thought, wait a minute, my heart's going like crazy.
Yeah.
What if my heart exploded? And then 10 minutes later, that idea kept going. It's like, well, what if there was some sort of neuro or biotoxin that made your heart go fast and kill you? What if it could only hit you if your heart rate's at 140? So, I got home and I had the world, and I had a character, and I had some ideas about medical distress that could happen to a heart, and verified those with my father. But yeah, that's how, and then I wrote Beat right away after that. Once I had all those, it was just too fresh to not write down.
And you come home and you're like, nobody bothered me. I'm writing.
I burst through the door of our tiny little house, and I said, honey, I've got my next bestseller. Which I've never had a bestseller, so I was lying apparently, but it's a good book, very fun.
Cool. So, are you self-published, traditionally published, mix?
So I started as an independent with my first book, Beyond the Cabin, because 2 years of rewrites from the startup, from the beginning to the end, and then revisions for another year, and then 5 years of being rejected by agents, in which they said, this is strong writing, and this is an intriguing idea. I have no idea how I could sell this, because it's like it's YA, but it's very serious YA, and it's dealt with in a very adult way. It's like, great, thanks. So 5 years later, I was like, I'm not waiting anymore. So I published it myself in 2014. But then I crossed paths with the acquiring editor of a local publisher here in Utah, and we hit it off. So I sent in a book. I sent in Beat, actually, and a couple months later, they got back to me saying they wanted to publish it. So I published with that small publisher for a little bit, but I won't name them because it was a bad situation. They're not somebody I would recommend, and ultimately took all my books back from them. It cost money. Lost a large amount of money on that whole process. So I am fully independent right now, but I have aspirations to not be entirely independent. I have a memoir that is actually good now. And I'd love to get that agented and published, but 200 agents later, with 2 tiny nibbles, most of them saying, "Hey, you're not really anybody, so we don't really care." Um, and then I have a series that's Old West fantasy, with dragons and mythological creatures, and I call it the Dragon Scale Posse. It's a bunch of Old West orphans coming together to fight evil. I wrote the first book, and it's real good, real good. Revised it until it was even better, and then I sent it in, and I had a publisher hold on to it for a year and a half. And they're really great. They're just really busy, and it came this close to getting a yes. So I still think that has potential for traditional. I like running my own show mostly. I just super hate marketing. Mm-hmm. Like, I super hate it, and I'm supposed to become friends with it, but it's hard. All the things I say, like, you have to learn how to do this. I don't really want to. So I've tried to learn, and I've keep coming this close to success and failing and dropping a little too short. So I think that book deserves greater skill than I currently possess to get out there.
Yeah. The marketing thing is tough because it just seems like authors and marketers are two different species.
Yeah. But then there are some writers who are like, no, I can do this. They got some special brain that I'm very jealous of. I have a friend, Bridget Baker. She's an amazing writer. Her works are really good. She writes a ton of stuff like fantasy. She's really doing well in the romance, but she also learned how to market it. She took the classes, and she's an amazing marketer. She's doing really well. And several other friends that are just figuring it out. It's like, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I haven't paid for any classes, but I've watched a ton of videos and read books and everything, and it's that sitting down or waking up in the morning saying, okay, I've got to post on TikTok today, and I just don't want to.
It's so depressing.
I don't want to.
But it's the thing is, you have to find something that you do want to do on those platforms, because the lack of desire to be there is going to come through. And I deleted my TikTok account twice already, because it's like, this is just murdering me. But I finally figured something out that I want to do. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but I'm going to just read the first 45 seconds of each chapter of my one series and post that on TikTok and see what happens. Yeah.
See what happens. Yeah. Yeah. And, sometimes I'm like, okay, I'll just post about just random stuff I'm doing, life stuff rather than book stuff. And then I think, and then you start telling yourself, well, who cares about that? Like, who cares what you're doing? But people do. Like, you're the biggest influencers are just posting inane stuff about their life. Mm-hmm. People like that. But it's convincing myself that anyone else cares.
Yeah, and I mean, the algorithm also being very convincing that nobody cares sometimes. I have, it sounds like you've got some kids in their teens at least. I have, my youngest is 13, my oldest is 24. I've got a couple of kids who are very aware of how the algorithm, favors these people or those people. And my daughter, who did some streaming because she was a big time video gamer for a while, she did really well. My daughter's absolutely beautiful. She is beautiful. I am not a beautiful person. Inside, maybe I have a nice spirit or something like that. But I don't have the classics, face or anything that's attractive. So the algorithm doesn't care about my face.
Yeah. I've got a neighbor who
really
figured it out. And so I talked to him for a while. He's not an author, but he figured it out, and he gets thousands of views on every video. And so I sat down with him and talked to him about it, and he told me, this is what you got to do. This is what you got to do. And it was overwhelming. And I tried one of his tricks, and that was probably one of the best videos so far, but I can't keep doing it. I'm not interested in this at all. I can't keep just posting those videos.
It's an interesting thing. I mean, I read a book called Real Artists Don't Starve by Jeff Goins, I think, or Goins. I don't know how to say his name. And it's a really good book. One of the things he stressed was become friends with the marketing aspect, but also have a patron. It's like, thank you. Have a patron. I mean, how do you have a patron? But it turns out today's patron is TikTok and Instagram, book. you know, and figuring out a way to do your art in a way that you like doing your art on those platforms is actually how you get the patrons going, apparently, for today's world. Plus, it's freer. It's free-ish, I think. Facebook ads are not free. They add up so fast.
They add up.
So fast. I came this close to
fast.
breaking a profit my last try. Like, just within shouting distance. It was too bad. Anyway, I'll figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's no longer just the Medici's just paying you to create.
Exactly.
art.
I mean, Michelangelo, that guy knew how to find patrons like crazy. Alberto Canova, he was an amazing sculptor. He had his patrons. Michelangelo was filthy rich because he found good patrons that wanted him to do his work.
Yeah. So do you think, talking about algorithms and everything, do you think being a clean author hurts your chances or helps?
I think ultimately it will help. It's because clean is not the most mainstream thing. It probably hurts it right now. But you know, with persistence is supposed to pay off, right? Eventually. And I have adopted a philosophy on this whole thing, and it's basically purposeful consistency. And sometimes I call it purposeful discipline. It's not just discipline for discipline's sake. It's, I have a purpose, so I'm going to be consistent in this area, and I'm going to be disciplined in this area. And it's based on the fact that humans we're called persistent predators. We can run longer than any other creature on this earth. We can run down any creature on this earth because we can just run forever. I personally cannot run forever, but I am biologically built to be able to run forever. But you're not going to run that down if you do stop. So I'm just going to not stop now, even though I've stopped before. I'm done stopping. So because of that, I think that it will ultimately become an advantage, especially in this wonderful thing that we're seeing in the world where I don't think the pendulum is swinging back from smut and filth and grotesque to clean and wholesome. But I think that the market of people who want that wholesome, that clean, that stuff that isn't going to imprint itself on you in a bad way, that market's growing. You can see it with Angel Studios, and you know the way their stuff is doing really well. The Chosen is getting big, you know. So I think that there's a growing market there, and people will find my stuff eventually. I have to keep telling myself that, but I also believe it. I believe it'll happen eventually.
Right. Yeah. And Angel Studios was a great example, just through their studio, but also their dry bar comedy, and that has really taken off. And you can see it also in movies. If you look in the past couple of years, which movies have done really well, which have been surprise hits. That I think you're right. I think there is, you can call it a silent majority or whatever you want to call it, but I think there are people that have made the decision. We're no longer going to put up with the status quo of, consuming what they tell us to consume. We want to choose.
I think as these platforms and these media, these content producers, as they start to realize that, or as they have begun to realize that, I think that we get more diversified content and better stories and stuff like that. But for me, I think it's a part of it is I need to find the right outlet for this stuff. The outlet is not Netflix. Netflix is going to Netflixify almost everything. There's very little on Netflix that I want to watch right now. And most of it's Bollywood movies, actually, which are magnificent, by the way. Oh, Bollywood. You want clean and uplifting. They barely even kiss on screen in those movies. They're so good. And the dance numbers are just electric. Anyway, I think we just have to keep pushing and keep finding outlets and platforms for what we're doing. I'm on Twitter, which sometimes is a mistake, honestly. You sometimes see a tweet that gets quote tweeted and grabbed by clean and wholesome type writers like me who don't write smut, where somebody says, why aren't there people out there writing better books, cleaner books? And we're like, we're right here. Come on. They're just not looking very hard. And the algorithm doesn't like us very much, it seems like sometimes as well.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the problems that we've discussed a lot, and that I think it's one that needs to be solved, is that people are looking, people are creating, but that the connection between the two is
Yeah.
not happening. And you know, I've asked a lot of authors or readers, how do you find the clean content? And it's a work. Like they spend an hour reading reviews and going researching before
Yeah.
they choose a book. And that just, you can't have a viable marketplace where the consumer has to do their own market
Yeah.
research
Yeah. People, I
before they
mean,
make a choice.
you learn about Amazon and putting your books up on Amazon. You're trying to make it as friction free to go from look at it to buy it as possible. No clicking. It needs to be obvious pretty quickly that, no, this is a book I like, because you've got the right cover, you've got the right blurb, you've tagged it up in the right way or something. It's not easy, but we're smart. I think a danger that a lot of people might fall into would be deciding that they should have a persecution complex. That the world's out to get them, or the algorithm's out to get them. It might be, but we shouldn't care so much. We should just care about doing great stuff.
Right. Yeah. It's not caring about
No,
it is not helpful.
you
It
get
doesn't
nowhere. I mean, I
accomplish
think
anything.
Bill Burr, yeah, he said something like, you could worry about something, but is that going to change the result? If it's going to change the result, worry about it and change the result. Otherwise, don't worry about it. You're not doing any good.
Mm-hmm.
Not a perfect quote, but pretty close.
Yeah. Go ahead. Do the thing that matters and is actually going to help. And we heard from one author once who said, the hard part is finding your tribe of readers, the people who like your stuff. But once you find them and they find you, then that connection is made and they'll read everything. So I think that's the challenge, is finding that tribe, and that might be shooting in the dark on Facebook or TikTok or wherever you're at until you find them. But when you do, that's when you've hit gold, and that's where that's your place. That's
true.
Where you reside.
It's, every effort we can make to find those people, I think, is not wasted. Sometimes we try a road, and it's good to find out that road isn't going to work. Sometimes it takes too long to find out that it's not going to work. But this is actually why I do a lot of in-person things. I go to farmers markets now as often as I can, because for one thing, my neighbors should know that I'm a writer. But also, just talking to people, it's word of mouth that sells books a lot of the time anyway, and end caps and Barnes and Noble. Right. But I'm not going to do what it takes to get in there.
Right.
But it's word of mouth, and I sell people on me, and I sell people on my books in person, and I do okay. So I think, again, bit by bit, it's supposed to build. That's what they say, at least. One of the things that I found, though, is that, so for example, my 4-book kid gets out of the cult and tries to figure out his life while dealing with PTSD and other abuse trauma. They're good, and there's elements that are totally mainstream, and you can see them all over the place in popular, literature and content. But these are pretty different kinds of books. The POV is as deep as you can possibly get for this character, and then the other main character that shows up. Yeah. And they're very serious, but also very funny at times. They're pretty unique books. Although anybody who reads them loves them, it's really hard to market them because they're not exactly mainstream. And so I'm actually at the point where I'm like, I'm not going to bother trying to market these right now. All the marketing is just passive at this point for all my other books that I'm writing intentionally to markets that I know exist in a way that the markets like, clean, wholesome stuff. So no more unique.
Yeah. Have you, well, but once if you can catch them with the other stuff, they'll go back. I think so.
In some cases, yeah, there's bleed over, but I'm also, I mean, it's going to be unique because it's me, and the way I write things, even mainstream stuff, is still me. But I know how to find the elements, and I've been doing this long enough. I've written 2 million plus words. I've published 2 million plus words at this point. So I think I can figure it out.
Mm-hmm. So have you done
audiobooks I actually do my own. I have this great mic, and it works pretty well. I actually finished building. So I used to do it in a box. Put my microphone in a padded box, and then I used a painter's drop cloth to make kind of a booth, but I actually have made a real sound booth that I can set up in here in about 5 minutes. And I do my own audiobooks, and I've got 5 of them done, and I have 5 to go. I like it a lot. I don't know how to market audiobooks, so I don't sell many, but they're there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're fun to do. I kind of did the same thing. I built a little
that's
booth that
awesome.
goes up behind me when I set up. So, and then I'm also down in the basement and have
Oh,
in
that
the
helps.
quietest room in the
I am
house.
upstairs, and I have a window right
So
there. So until my neighbor's dog
yeah,
moved, it was hard to record things for about a year and a half. So I'm way behind, and it was actually almost entirely because of the dog. So, but I'll get there. I'll get there.
yeah.
It is.
It's a lot of fun to do, especially once you get that,
Yeah.
once you get the setup, and once you figure out your editing process and all that. I think the hardest thing for me doing it is my voice. I can only do
Right.
so much a day, and I want to do more, but my voice, like, I can hear it
Right.
start to change, and so I have to
Yeah.
stop.
Lubrication the whole
But
time. But yeah, I think the longest
yep,
session of actual recording I've ever done was about 4 hours. Um, yeah,
that's pretty good.
I was pushing it a little bit, but I was anxious to get that book done.
I mean, it's a muscle like anything else. So the more you do it, the stronger
Yeah, I
it
mean,
gets, and the longer
I
you can go. But
my favorite audiobook narrator is Bronson Pinchot. He's Balky Bartokomous from Perfect Strangers from back when I was very young. Um,
yeah,
he's also Serge in the Beverly Hills Cop movies. Anyway, he's so fun. He's an amazing audiobook narrator. I mean, he's flawless. I've never found any errors in what he does or in any skips or anything. And sometimes
yeah,
wondered now, is he just doing this for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day? Because it just seems so fluid and so smooth, but also incredibly intentional. His voices are just consistent. He is great, absolutely great.
yeah. There are a number of narrators where I will listen to a book by them, no matter who
Yeah,
the author
Bronson
is.
Pinchot, he's great. He's my guy. Yeah,
He's the guy. Cool. Awesome. Well, we
right.
are about out of time, so I need to go back and I'm going to guess
Okay.
the true truth and a lie. So let's remind myself and others. The first is that you won a primetime game show in the last 5 years. Number 2, you worked for one of the biggest companies in the world for 3 years, and number 3, you drove from Seattle to Orem, Utah, in 9 hours. All right. Well, I've made the drive from Seattle to Orem actually a bunch of times, and 9 hours is impressive. That's flying, um, especially through Oregon.
Freaking Oregon, man.
The snow.
Oh, I do not like that state.
Yeah,
I do not like that state.
that little corner of Oregon. There's always, as soon as you cross the border,
And I
there's
never
always
get
one
gas
more
there. I will never get gas in Oregon.
because you
I
can't
pump
get you
my
can't
gas.
pump your own.
Nobody
They
touches my.
pump it for
So
you.
ridiculous.
So, I mean, that's an impressive claim to make. But worked for the biggest company. Like I said, you've done a lot of different jobs. So I'm going to just go out on a limb. I'm kind of just shooting in the dark here. That you won a primetime game show is the lie.
That is incorrect. I won a primetime game show about 3 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, fun. So which
The
which one
drive.
was the lie?
The fastest I did it was 10 hours between Seattle and Orem.
Okay.
And that was insane. That's probably not okay.
Yeah, I was.
But I was in a hurry. I had to
No.
get to work.
You have just admitted to a crime.
I did.
Statute
Yeah, I
of
hope so.
limitations is up.
Don't come at me, bro. No, yeah, the game show was called The Hustler. It only lasted for 2 seasons, but it was on ABC, and it was hosted by Craig Ferguson. Craig Ferguson being that hilarious, crazy Scottish man who used to have a late night show.
Yeah.
He was so good at late night, and he's the voice of Dauber in How to Train Your Dragon series. Yeah, it was really fun. It was like Survivor meets Jeopardy. And I beat the living cannoli out of people. All the psychology study I did, man, it helped so much.
It helps.
I had to manipulate people. I actually had to act, lie, and manipulate, and I beat them all. And and people who watched the show were like, "How are they not guessing that it's him?" because the concept is basically there's 5 people in a room. They have to all agree on the answers to trivia questions. And every time they get an answer right, money goes in the bank. And then if they get it wrong, they don't get the money. But one of them is the hustler. They've been told all the answers already, and they have to try to help everybody get the right answer without people realizing that they're doing that. But the people are also getting clues about who the hustler is throughout the game as well. I was the hustler, and yeah, I apparently I'm real good at lying and manipulating people. Because at the end, I totally just, they should have caught me on what I did at the end, but they did not, because I had them so snowed. I would, say go find it and watch it online, but I don't think you can. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate. But it was fun. That was an amazing experience. I'm tied with a former spy for biggest win. Yeah. It was
Nice. Great. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I had a great time. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for being here with us. And for all of you listeners out there, please subscribe and share and help get the word out about Clean Authors and about the podcast. And we can help get this content to more people. So thank you so much. And we'll catch you next time on the Clean Library Podcast.